Okay. All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is Ellen Perellis Weiler, and I am chair of the Council of Lafayette Women. I'd like to thank you all for joining us tonight for the presentation by Amy Herman called Getting the Fix, New Lenses for Effective Problem Solving. We appreciate you taking the time out of your busy professional and personal lives to join us and to connect once again with our wonderful alma mater, Lafayette College. Before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items, and you'll have to excuse me for looking at the list. I have not memorized this. First, please know that we have utilized the audience mute feature in order to ensure that the presentation is not interrupted by any background noise. We invite you to include your full name and class year on your profile by renaming yourself. That's in the ellipsis in the top right corner of your box. If you right click on that, you'll see the rename function. We welcome questions and ask that you use the chat feature located at the bottom of your screen to type in any that you may have. We'll be entertaining questions. Amy will be entertaining questions at the end of her formal presentation. Please know that this presentation will be recorded so that you and the rest of the Lafayette community will have access to it at a later time. The Council of Lafayette Women has many esteemed members, and I would like to introduce them tonight. If they are on the call, could you please do a little quick wave, a Queen's wave to the audience? Lenita Dorflinger, class of 75, Janet Edelstein, class of 81, Renee Schneck-Tesoro, class of 82, Terry Gala, class of 83, Abby Burkholder, class of 84, Courtney Matthews, class of 91, Mimi McLean, class of 93, Kristen Gibbons-Fedden, class of 04, Janine Fector, class of 06, Libby Caldwell, class of 09, Kristen Anderson, class of 14, Lila Daly, class of 14, Katie Livernese, class of 14, Melanie Shore, class of 11, Audrey Dadal, class of 15, Esther Flavian, class of 20, and our esteemed liaison and I would say co-leader, Rachel Nelson Muller, class of 88, parent 21, who is the Executive Director of Diversity Initiatives, Volunteer Experience, and Talent Strategy. So thank you all for joining us. I'd now like to introduce our speaker, Amy Herman. Amy is from the great class of 88, and I have to say that because I have to give her kudos and give Rachel and any other 88s on there. I figured I'd just do that. 88, she is an art historian who uses art to sharpen observation, analysis, and communication skills for all ranges of professionals. She looks closely at works of art and helps individuals to hone their visual intelligence to recognize the most pertinent information and recognize biases that may impede decision-making and best practices in all industries. She developed the art of perception while working at the Frick Museum for 10 years. She did it to help improve medical students' observation and communication skills. She adapted the program for a wide range of professionals, including the New York City Police Department, the FBI, the State Department, Fortune 500 companies, Doctors Without Borders, and the military. She received her bachelor's, obviously, at Lafayette College. She received her Juris Doctor from George Washington University and her master's in art history from Hunter College in New York City. Her book, Visual Intelligence, was published in 2016. I have a copy here in case any of you missed that, her first go round, and was on the New York Times and Washington Post bestsellers list. Her second book, which she's going to be talking about tonight, Fixed, How to Perfect the Fine Art of Problem Solving, was published this past December. And her third book, which she'll hold up in a minute, actually she can do it right now, Smart, use your eyes to boost your brain, is an adaptation of the visual intelligence book and is geared to young adults. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Amy Herman, class of '88.
Thank you so much, Ellen, for that lovely introduction. I'm overjoyed to be here. I want to thank you and to thank Rachel and for the Council of Lafayette Women for hosting this event. It's like coming home, and it's so wonderful to see so many familiar faces. So I'm really excited for this presentation. I want to thank you all. I know that time is the most precious commodity. And so I want to let you know how much I appreciate all of you sharing your time with me tonight. I'm going to share my screen because it's so much more fun to look at works of art than it is to look at me and my bookshelves. So I'm going to put the chat room up and I'm going to get to the beginning of the presentation. Here we go. Okay, thumbs up. Can you see the slides? You can see the slides. All right, all good. So I'm really excited to present tonight, to pick up where we left off from the last presentation on visual intelligence. And the title of this evening's presentation is Getting to Fixed New Lenses for Problem Solving. And as Ellen said in her kind introduction, it is based on my new book, Fixed. And when people have asked me, why do all these clients come to me to work with works of art, I realized that everyone has a problem to solve. And I wrote this book before the pandemic happened, not knowing all the problems that we would be facing as we're coming out of the pandemic, as we're beginning to turn the corner. And I had my real wake-up call just 2 years ago at the end of February of 2020. I was coming back from Rome. I had been doing this program for the NATO Defense College for NATO officials in Rome who goes to Italy before a pandemic breaks out. And they wanted to take my temperature at the airport. And I thought, well, isn't that strange? Why does anyone want to take my temperature? And I came home and the world shut down. I got one of the last flights out of Europe. And so I really buckled down and had to pivot, as so many of you did. So this book, Fixed, and this presentation is a result of the pandemic and thinking about all the problem solving that we are going to have to do now as we're turning the corner to come out of it, and everything that we can look back on over the last 2 years and think about what we did well and what we didn't do so well. So without further ado, I'm going to just repeat the rules that I had for the last presentation, that you don't take any notes on this, and that I hope you'll refrain from using the words obviously and clearly, because if we've learned anything in the last 2 years, nothing is obvious and even less is clear, especially when it comes to problem solving. And I'm overjoyed to share this first work of art because not only is it the cover of the book, but in honor of Women's History Month and the Council of Lafayette Women, this is a work of art by Kumi Yamashita. And what I love about the work of art itself is that it's illustrative of what so many of us have gone through over the last 2 years. We've had to pull our world together. The way Kumi Yamashita, the way the artist looked at these blocks, she used her visual intelligence. And she had to look at the blocks, not just for the property of blocks, but for the shadows that they would create. And what she did is she shone a single work of a single source of light through these blocks to create the beautiful silhouette that you see on the left. This is how she created the work of art. And I think it just illustrates so much of what we have had to do. We have to pull it together every day. When I was in lockdown, my life was very much like these blocks, this, scattered, seemingly chaotic situation. And we had to shine a single source of light through it because we needed to pull it together for our stakeholders and our relationships and our families and our clients and our work. And so I'm hoping tonight I can help to be that source of light to pull it together as we face the problem solving that we're all going to have to do. So why do we use art? Because art gives us an opportunity to look at everything from the very complex, like the picture on the left from the 17th century, to the simplest images, like the one you see on the right from the 21st century, and everything in between, complexity and chaos, and simplicity and the sublime, and everything in between. Art gives us an opportunity to use it as a new set of data, Because one thing that we've all come out of this pandemic knowing is that yesterday's solutions are not going to solve tomorrow's problems. So we need to be able to craft more innovative solutions. And what I have tried to do with my work around the world, working with different clients, is use art as a set of data to broaden their vision to solve problems more creatively. So I'm going to begin with the artist Giorgio Morandi. And some of you may know Morandi, and when you speak to art historians, people sometimes roll their eyes and they say, oh, Morandi, or they say, oh, I absolutely adore his work. It seems to be one of the two extremes. Morandi was born and died in Bologna, and he only left the city 3 times in his adult life. And he devoted himself to his work that involved cups and bottles and jars and vases, cups and bottles and jars and vases. And he moved them around and he shifted them around. And here is an example of Morandi's work. And the reason I open with the artwork of Giorgio Morandi is because I recently saw some of his works here in New York, and I read the wall text, which I don't usually do. And it said that Morandi's work is about the interrelationships of all things. It's about space and volume and light and shadow and color and appearance. And he constantly shifted and moved the vases, the bottles, the cars, the cups, the jars, and the bowls, and moved them around and really exploited the interrelationships of all things. And I'm using that as an analogy for problem solving. Don't we all just have to shift things around all the time? The resources that we have in front of us to solve our problems. So I want us to use Morandi as sort of a foundation to think about how we can move things around to craft better solutions. Now, you may think this is an insurmountable hurdle. You know, it's a hard road. And I'm showing you a painting by Wayne Thiebaud, who painted the streets of San Francisco. And I really don't think it's as hard as this. Any of you that have walked the streets of San Francisco know this is what the city looks like. I don't think the work ahead of us is as hard as this. To show you another work by Thiebaud, I think we're actually right here. I think we're about to go over the hill. And we're at this critical juncture where we can look back to see what went well in the last 2 years. We can see what didn't go well and think about what we want to carry forward with us, because I don't want to be the half glass empty person, but we know that something else is going to come down the road, whether it's, you know, a subvariant of the virus or some other catastrophic event. And I hope that we'll be better prepared, because we are in a different place than we were 2 years ago. We weren't going over the top of the hill 2 years ago. We understand more about the science of the virus. We do have vaccines. And as a global civilization, we have taken this on together, that we are able to move forward, I think, in a more positive way. Because this is where we are right now, Glenn Ligon's work, showing us that America has literally and figuratively been turned upside down, but I believe that we are in a position to turn it right side up now. But I want to say that with the caveat that whatever the new normal turns out to be, our hashtag new normal, it's not going to look like the normal of 2 years ago. And we need to sort of dampen those expectations. And it's not to say it's not going to be a better normal. It's just not going to resemble the normal of 2 years ago. So I asked you in the last presentation on the art of perception to shift your perspective with me, to shift your perspective like this artist, JR. And what he did is JR is a photographer. He takes photographs of people and blows them up and puts them all over the world on sidewalks and runways and tops of buildings. But some countries didn't like that he was doing that, and they issued warrants for his arrest for defacing public property. And while those warrants were pending, he was commissioned to do the self-portrait. And I think it's brilliant. It's called Self-Portrait in a Woman's Eye, Kenya 2009. And the reason I think it's brilliant is he shifted his perspective on self-portraiture, took a picture of himself, and you don't know what he looks like. Why? Because if you knew what he looked like, it would be easier to get arrested, and who wants to get arrested? Now, I'm going to assume that no one at the presentation tonight is trying to evade arrest. So why is it that you need to shift your perspective? Because here's a world, here's a snapshot of our world right now, and I don't have enough real estate to show all the things that we're facing. We are still a world subsumed by the coronavirus and the vaccines. All I have to do is say Ukraine. We have a renewed understanding of NATO. Gas prices are through the roof. We are living with disruptive technology. We are still reducing our lives to Zoom. Travel is disrupted. Books are being banned, and we're still communicating 24/7 on social media. it's enough to give you a headache. But because there's no bright line that separates the world we live in from the world we work in, we need to be able to shift our perspective in the world we live in to be more effective in the world that we work in. But we have to face the fact that everything is broken right now. Everything is broken and in need of fixing. And I'm showing you the work of Stephen Young Lee, who makes his ceramics purposefully broken. And he actually makes them, incorporates the aesthetic of their brokenness to make them beautiful. And so I want us to think about broken in a different context now, because we have to think about fixing in a different context. This cover of the Arts and Leisure section of the New York Times from a few years ago was tailor-made for me. And it says, looking the other way, and it turned 10 pictures, it reversed 10 pictures so that you're only seeing the backs of the frames and the backs of the canvas. And it reminded me, the article was about how the arts give us an opportunity to look the other way when we don't want to see things. And I believe that we don't have the option of looking the other way. We don't have the option of tuning out the world. And as we start to see all the art that is produced as a result of the pandemic, it reminds us that we don't have the option of looking the other way. And in fact, I hope that by embracing looking at works of art and the analysis of works of art, we can find better and more innovative solutions. And as tempting as it is to turn our back on things like Thomas Gainsborough did in this beautiful drawing, we really can't do it. But you know what Gainsborough did is encourage me to think about what's behind me and what's to the right and what's to the left, and to augment my own peripheral vision to see things differently, to solicit multiple perspectives to make better decisions. And if you see what Gainsborough did on the back, the exquisite Achilles tendon, the back of the heel, the nape of her neck, the beautiful design of her dress, all seen from the back, is encouragement to all of us to think of what's behind us. Let's look behind us, let's look to all sides, and not just have myopia as we have for so long. And definitely don't do this. I know it's tempting. One of my favorite photographs by Dora Maar, don't bury your head in the sand. There's nothing good that can come from this. And again, I know it's very tempting. The world is falling apart. We see what's happening in Ukraine, and it is tempting to just bury our heads, but that's not an option either. We are global citizens, we are local citizens. And again, by bringing the world of art to all the different clients that I do, I hope I'm giving them a new lens through which they can see the problems that we're facing. So in Fixed, from the opening chapters, I use the artistic process as a template for thinking about problem solving. And I've divided the book into three sections that every artist does when creating a work of art: prep, draft, and exhibit. And the work of art that I've carried through the book from the opening chapter to the end is what you see in front of you. It's the Raft of the Medusa by Theodore Géricault, and it was painted in 1819, and it memorializes this terrible event that happened off the coast of Mauritania, off the coast of Africa in 1816. The frigate, the boat, the Méduse, ran aground off the coast of Africa, and the captain was incompetent and his crew was incompetent. And as soon as the boat ran aground, he realized very quickly things were going to, go south very quickly. There were not enough lifeboats to accommodate everybody on the boat. So he saved himself and he saved his crew and his senior officers. And there was a makeshift raft because there weren't enough lifeboats. And 147 people were cast upon this raft. And the lifeboats tugged the raft for a while, but very soon they saw it was slowing everything down. So the raft was cut. And for 15 days, this raft was adrift in the open sea. And as you can imagine, the 147 people really, it was terrible what happened. There was starvation, there was dehydration, and they were reduced to cannibalism. And in the end, after the 13 days, that they were spent adrift, all but 15 of the 147 people died on the raft. And so what I've done is I've taken the process that Géricault used to create the Raft of the Medusa from his preparation. He said this was such a scandal, and it was a scandal for the French government that he couldn't let it go, and he wanted to create this painting. And so I used his model from prep to his preparatory drafts, how he worked out all the problems that he had to overcome to create the painting, and how it was ultimately exhibited in Paris and in London. And so what I've done in the book is I've broken down the Raft of the Medusa into all of its component parts so readers can understand the exact process that Jericho went through to solve his problem. And I put problem in quotes in the artistic process. How was he going to create this painting? And so he interviewed survivors. He interviewed the engineer who survived the raft, and he borrowed decaying body parts and decomposition from the local morgue, and he brought them into his studio so he could accurately depict the figures on the raft. And I just broke down all these parts to give you an idea of how Jericho broke down the project from making this huge canvas, this 23 by 16 foot canvas, and how he broke it down so we could use it as a template to solve some of our greater problems. And the final stage of the Raft of the Medusa was the exhibit, and here it is on the wall at the Louvre. It has almost its entire wall, and I call it a destination. It's not the Mona Lisa at the Louvre, but hundreds of thousands of people travel every year to see the Raft of the Medusa. And although it's a harrowing, just really frightful painting, it makes a perfect template for thinking about innovative problem solving. So we begin, as we did in the last session, when we think about problem solving, remembering the foundation. The first one is no two people see anything the same way. We have to remember that no two people see anything the way we do through our eyes, human eyes attached to a human brain. All artificial intelligence notwithstanding, no two people see anything the same way. And what I'm showing you are two portraits of the same woman. Mrs. Maud Dale, married to Chester Dale, collector of art. And the picture on the right is by George Bellows. The picture on the left is Fernand Léger. And if I didn't tell you they were the same person, most people wouldn't know that it is the same subject. So no two people see anything the same way. This goes for situations as well. I'm showing you two paintings by Matisse. The one on the left, they're the same scene. They're both the open window at Coulior. And might I just throw it in there that I saw these for the first time in Professor Madison's class in 1986. Thank you, Bob. And the picture on the left is from 1905. And it was Matisse's view out the window in the southern port city of Coulior. It was verdant and pinks and oranges and blues and this vibrant, gorgeous scene out the window. And the picture on the right is the same subject done 9 years later in 1914. But the world in 1914 was a very different place than it was in 1905. Matisse's town had been taken over by the Germans. His brother had been taken prisoner. And the world was in World War I. It was a much darker place. So even the same subject can be seen so differently. And to take this one step further, I want to show you two paintings by Rembrandt. The one on the right is from 1628, and the one on the left is from 1648. And they illustrate the exact same scene. It's the biblical narrative, the supper at Emmaus. And written from the point of view of one of his disciples. And Christ breaks bread with two of his disciples, and at the moment that he breaks the bread, he reveals himself to his disciples to be the resurrected Christ. And you can see in Rembrandt's painting of 1628 on the right, the disciples are just blown away. One knocks over his chair and he's on the floor, and the other one, to make a terrible pun, looks like the fear of God is in him. And Christ is illuminated by this incredible, really stark, shadow and light that Rembrandt has created. And both narratives talk about a servant in the background, indifferent to what's happening. And on the left painting, you can see the servant in the background. Fast forward 20 years to 1648, and here you have Rembrandt's version of the same subject, the Supper at Emmaus, but everything is just toned down. Rembrandt has highlighted the architecture and the perspective and the space. And we only see Christ not in that bright, stark light, but just in a gentle halo. And the two disciples are taking it all in, and the servant is still indifferent. But what I want you to take away is that we can see problems, we can see situations differently depending on where we are in our lives, even where we are in our day. when I was practicing law and I had an argument before Judge Brown, I would pray that my argument was scheduled for the afternoon because we all knew Judge Brown was not a morning person. And so if you had arguments before Judge Brown in the morning, it might not go so well. So depending on our external circumstances can drastically affect how we see the same thing. And I also want to remind you, as if we don't know this, that things change. Things change on a dime. And I'm showing you 3 portraits of one of Picasso's lovers, Marie-Thérèse Walter. And the drawing that you see on the far left was Marie-Thérèse before the affair. The painting in the center is during the affair. And the picture on the far right is when the affair was over. So I will pass the question to you. Do you think Picasso changed his mind about how he saw the lovely Marie-Thérèse Walter? Things really do change. And we have to be astute about observing these changes because that's what we incorporate into our problem solving. We also, every time things change, and given the world we're living in now, we have to constantly get our bearings. We have to readjust our bearings. And, if you look at this photograph and it makes you dizzy, it's doing its job. Where are we? Are we at the top of the stairs? And we have a curving staircase and we have the biker, and we have to constantly reassess and realign our bearings. And I hope by looking at works of art that I can give people an additional tool to be able to do that. And what does this come down to? It comes down to a term we use in the intelligence community all the time. It's knowing your situational awareness. Before you can solve a problem, you have to know your situational awareness. Where are you? How did you get there? How do you get out? Anybody that's ridden the New York City subway knows all about situational awareness. How did I get here? How did I get out? Who's around me? And I'm showing you a work of art in Rome that is a sculpture that goes across the archway. And, as you watch people go, nobody looks up. I certainly want to know if there was a sculpture over my head. I'm sure the man sitting at the table with his glass of Prosecco knows that that sculpture is there, but people don't look up. They're so intent on getting from point A to point B, and I want to help them augment that vision to increase their own situational awareness. And to illustrate this, I'm showing you a photograph, a New York Times photograph from September 2013, the Westgate Mall, Nairobi, Kenya. And I show it to you because it's not only is it a compelling visual image, but this woman that you see in the photograph came to the Westgate Mall that morning with her 2 children for a cooking class. It was like a Williams-Sonoma kind of store. And her situational awareness, whether it was maternity that made her situational awareness kick in, she knew that the counter at which they were working was not only fortified by a counter behind it, but a wall to the left. And so when the Al-Shabaab militants came in and commenced their attack on the mall, this mother took her 2 children, hid in the safe space, and she sang to her children for 5 hours. This woman sang to her children for 5 hours, and they survived. 68 other people did not, because their situational awareness did not kick in. And as I read the intelligence reports that came out of the Westgate Mall incident, they found people in air shafts. They found them in ovens that weren't operating because people's situational awareness kicked in and said, I need to save myself. I need to get out of this situation. So understanding your own situational awareness is the first step in effective problem solving. So how do we bring art into situational awareness? I'm showing you Velázquez's iconic painting, Las Meninas. The 17th century painting, if you try to get your bearings, where are we? Well, we have the Infanta in the center, and we have her ladies in waiting. But then when you look to the left of the painting, you see a piece of canvas. And the piece of canvas tells you that directly behind the piece of canvas is the artist Velázquez himself. And yes, it's the brush and palette that give him away. And he seems to be looking at his subject. Well, he's looking at where we're standing, but we are not the subject of the painting, because if you look directly in front of us, there's a framed, what appears to be a mirror, and who's in the mirror but the king and the queen. That's who the subject of the painting is. But don't forget, you have a man who's in a doorway in the back. Is he going or coming? Who is he? What's he looking at? And then in the middle ground, you have a nun. Who is the nun talking to? Who's the man? Why is she in shadow? Then you have a window to the right and light, and we haven't even addressed all the paintings on the wall. This is what situational awareness asks of you. Where are you, and how would you describe your surroundings to someone who couldn't see it? So art lends itself beautifully, because for the majority of the people that I work with, we're at ground zero. They haven't seen the art before, and it's all new data for them, and they're using it to explore the idea of articulating situational awareness. So in the last presentation, I introduced the idea of art as a new lens through which to see communication, perception, and observation skills in a new way. And so to illustrate this, I'm showing you the work of Gabriel Daw. What I'm showing you are these sculptures made of cotton thread. Art gives us an opportunity to think about seeing, observing, perception, and now problem solving in a different way. It gives us an opportunity to ask questions, like looking at this work by Sam Gilliam, to ask the question, what is this? Is it a painting? Is it a sculpture? How did the artist create it? Did he have a sculpture that was suspended and he painted and he took it down? What are those, how did he scrunch up the pieces of canvas? Is it painting? Is it sculpture? It gives us an opportunity to ask all kinds of questions in the hope that it will broaden our lens to see different solutions to the problems that we're facing. So to show you this work by Dali, what I'm trying to do is bring art into our brains to understand how we make decisions, to use it as this new set of data to internalize how we look at art. So in turn, people that don't work with art or look at art every day can use it to craft better solutions. So by working in law enforcement and medicine and the intelligence community and crisis responders, shock and trauma nurses, giving them an opportunity to step out of their everyday learning environment, because I believe the best things happen on the exit ramp of our comfort zone. So when I started working with one of our intelligence agencies back in 2004, I wasn't allowed to be in the room with any of the analysts until I had read their open source document called The Psychology of Intelligence Analysis. And let me tell you, it's better than Ambien. I mean, snoozer, except that there was a great chapter on perception. And that chapter gave me a template to think about any new problem, any new conflict, any new situation. And it's a three-pronged template, 3 questions. And I want you to ask those questions as you look at this photograph. Number 1, what do I definitively know? Number 2, what don't I know? And you say, well, how do I know what I don't know? You identify what's missing. And number 3, if I had the opportunity to get more information, what do I need to know? So looking at the photograph in front of you, well, what do we definitively see? We see a man up to his chin in water carrying a sewing machine, a rather decrepit looking sewing machine. He has white hair, a white beard. His skin looks like it's been exposed to the sun and he's smiling. What don't we know? We don't know who the man is. We don't know where he is geographically. We don't know where he is locally. We don't know what the deal is with his sewing machine. We don't know why doesn't he look terrified that he's up to his chin in water. We don't know who the photographer is, and we don't know what the relationship is between this subject and the photographer. And the third question logically follows, if you had the opportunity to get more information, what do you need to know? You don't need to know all the things that we identified in the second prong. What you need to know is who is this guy and what's the deal with his sewing machine? Where's he going? So the picture was taken by a photographer named Steve McCurry, who made a name for himself taking pictures of people after monsoons in India. The picture was taken in the state of Gujarat, 1986. And the reason the man is smiling is he lost everything in a monsoon, but he saved his means of making a living. This man is a tailor. Now, if you can see, if your visual intelligence was on cue, on the side of the sewing machine, it says FAFF, P-F-A-F-F. That's an old German sewing machine company. And when this picture was taken in 1986, there was no internet. The only thing that went viral was a virus. And this picture became so popular that it landed on the front cover of National Geographic magazine. And when the FAFF company saw this photograph through Steve McCurry, they sent this man a brand new state-of-the-art sewing machine. Now, I don't tell you this because it's a touchy-feely, happy ending story. I tell you for 2 reasons. Number 1, to illustrate how the intelligence community and how many of us use the model, what do I know, what don't I know? And if I had the opportunity to get more information, what do I need to know? But it also shows you the benefits of getting the backstory. Look how much greater your appreciation is for the photograph when you know the backstory. But the problem is we are so pressed for time that we don't have the time, human or financial resources to always get the backstory. But what this can do is give you a model for making a decision and solving a problem, saying, all right, I know this. I don't know this. And based on that information, this is what I'm going to decide. But conversely, you can also say, I know this. I don't know this. Please go out and get me this information. And once I have it, I'll make a decision. It just breaks down the problem into digestible bite-sized pieces. So to give you an example of how I would use this in exercises, look at the painting that I'm showing you. And I want you to think to yourself, what do you know? What don't you know? And if you have the opportunity to get more information, what do you want to know from this painting? Now, it's rather, it doesn't seem that complex. There's a background, a middle ground, and a foreground. We have some barns and a house in the background. We have some kind of agriculture, farming in the middle ground. But the real, subject are these two people. We have one woman to the right in profile. We see her hat and her diamond-looking hat pin and her double chin and her face in profile and her faux fur collar. And then we see that needlepoint purse. And then the other figure, we're not 100% sure of the gender. It could be binary, non-binary, not really sure. Also wearing a hat in three-quarter pose, looking at the woman with the needlepoint purse. Now, I hope in one of your questions, you want to know about the bird. Why is this person holding a hen or a chicken? What is the relationship between these two people? What is the subject of any conversation? Because their mouths aren't open. So we can really use that model. What do I know? What don't I know? If I had the opportunity to get more information, what do I need to know with any problem or any situation? So why do we need to do this in the first place? Because we need to take a different view. As I said before, yesterday's solutions are not going to solve tomorrow's problems or even today's problems. So we need to step back and look at things from a different perspective, like Richard Estes did. One of my favorite pictures, these people are having their cigarettes and their coffee and their dessert, but you don't think of looking at them from a bird's eye view. It gives you a whole different perspective on four people having dessert. We need to, when we look at things from a different perspective, what I ask my clients and my readers to do and my participants is to look for the extraordinary in the ordinary, to take another look at the resources that you have at your fingertips and try to see different things in them. Look at the shadow of the silverware. The shadow of the fork is just extraordinary. So why do we do this? So we're doing this because we have all literally and figuratively been backed into the corner. And to illustrate being backed into the corner, I've chosen Irving Penn's photographs. He has a whole suite of photographs entitled, I'm sure you've guessed this, Portraits in a Corner. And in 1948, Irving Penn built walls that formed a corner, and he invited 50 luminaries, 50 famous people to come pose in the corner. And you think, well, who wants to pose in a corner? It's confining, it's uncomfortable. Well, he invited such interesting famous people as the Duchess of Windsor and Louis Armstrong and E.B. White and Marcel Duchamp. And do you know, not a single person said no. And I just find that fascinating. They brought props and costumes and they posed in these really creative ways. And it gave me insight into what we can do when we're backed into a corner. When you're backed into a corner, I know what you want to do is get out and solve the problem. But what Irving Penn taught me and what I've tried to pass on to my readers and my clients is, yes, I know you want to get out of the corner, but what can you do while you're there? All these people express their creativity in such a visually compelling way, because the truth is you're going to be backed into corners over and over and over again, especially if you're in a position of leadership. When I work with my officers at the Pentagon, we solve one problem, and before I leave, they're on to another one. So not only how do we get out of being backed into a corner, but what can we do while we're there? So to give you a very, very contemporary illustration of what I'm trying to get people to do, this is just brilliant. When the coronavirus first appeared in New York City in March of 2020, it was a terrible situation. We had critical care cases and we were running out of PPE, personal protective equipment. There were morgues in the streets. It was just a critical, highly critical red alert situation in New York. And the hospitals, especially in the Bronx, came up with this ingenious idea that just is so illustrative of what I want people to do to solve problems. When the critical care units were filled in the hospital, each of these patients that was on a ventilator also had an IV on a pole. And every time the IV ran out and the alarm would go off or the bell would ring, a nurse would have to get up, leave his or her station, go into the room, don a mask, a face shield, a gown, and gloves, change the bag, come out, get rid of the PPE, go back to the nursing station, and put on a whole new set of PPE. And when the bell rang again for the next patient, they had to do the same thing. And they were going through PPE at an alarming rate, and hospitals were running out of the equipment. And some brilliant person had the idea to get extra tubing and bring the IV poles outside of the patient's room. So all they did was take extra tubing, bring the IV poles outside the room so that when the bell rang, when the IV pole was empty, the nurse just had to get up from the station, walk to the pole, change the IV, and go back, no change of PPE. And on top of it, it reduced exposure to the coronavirus to an infected patient. Brilliant. Looking at the resources in a different way to solve the problem of diminishing supplies of PPE. And now that practice through the CDC has been spread all over the country, and they have what they call collective patient IV systems out in the hallway. And it's also less disruptive for the patient. Of course, there's safety protocols, but this is what I'm trying to illustrate. How can we look at our existing resources differently to solve problems that we're facing, because this is not the time to bring in far-flung innovation. Nobody has the time coming out of a pandemic to do this. So one more problem I want to illustrate and how it was solved. Many of you may have seen this on the news in October of 2021. Game wardens in Pine, Colorado saw this elk on their surveillance videos. And when you get over the absurdity of what you're looking at, it's really very sad. There was an elk running around Pine, Colorado with a tire around its neck. And what happened was when the elk was young, before it had antlers, it had come into contact with human pollution, gotten this tire around its neck, and then grew antlers and could not dislodge the tire. So the game wardens were concerned that this was a really potential dangerous situation, because the tire was going to cut into the elk's neck, or another wild elk was going to see this as a predator, see this as a threat, and kill the elk. So what did they do? They decided to tase the elk. Now, I don't know how many graduates of Lafayette College have had to tase elks, but I'm going to tell you what this entails. It's hard to do. Okay, this is a wild elk. But by the time the game wardens finally got the elk down, they ran into yet another problem. They went to saw the tire off the elk's neck, and they ran into a steel rim. It was a steel rim tire of all things. So again, for those of you that have tased elks, I welcome your input, but you have a short window. When an animal this big is under a tase, you have a very short window to solve your problem before the animal wakes up. So what did they do to solve the second problem? Brilliant. They shaved off the antlers and took the tire off the elk's neck. Elk woke up, ran away, and they've been monitoring the elk, and you'll all be happy to know that it grew its antlers back. Why am I telling you this ludicrous story? Because what it illustrates when it comes to problem solving, I want to remind all of us not to let perfection be the enemy of good. Sometimes good has to be good enough. We're not going to solve, in our lifetime, we're not going to solve the overarching problem of wildlife coming into contact with human detritus. It's just not going to happen. How often do they have to remove plastic bottles from animals' hooves and get things out of their intestines? And to apply it to your situation, sometimes you just have to staunch the bleeding. You have to put a Band-Aid on and say, you know what, good is good enough, and I'm going to move on to something that really requires my attention. I'm not advocating that we shouldn't aspire to perfection, but especially those of you who are parents, you know what, sometimes when you're a parent, good is good enough. Don't let perfection be the enemy of good. So in the last presentation, we talked about kintsugi, repairing mistakes with gold, and how in Japanese ceramicists and potters, instead of throwing flawed pottery away, they fill the cracks in with gold and silver and platinum lacquer, bringing the mistakes to the fore and honoring the struggle. But now I want to introduce another concept, Japanese aesthetic of wabi-sabi. And what wabi-sabi says is to embrace imperfection, and that imperfection is going to occur. And rather than fight it, let's incorporate it into the way we live. And it has a way of de-escalating and taking the stress out of situations. And I wanted to give you one example of wabi-sabi in solving a problem. In New York City, we have a florist. His name is Lewis Miller. And when I say Lewis Miller is florist to the stars, he is florist to the stars. He makes hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of floral arrangements for very famous people. And Lewis Miller faced a problem. He had some dissatisfaction at the end of these huge events. He had these beautiful flowers that nobody would get to see. So what he did is he started populating New York with his flowers. He put them in garbage cans, and he put them around fire hydrants, and he put them on staircases and in Central Park, augmenting exponentially the number of people who got to enjoy the flowers. And he said the greatest thing for him was there was no perfection to this. There was no client saying, put the pinks with the blues. He put it out however it fell, however he wanted to, and people enjoyed it so much. Wabi Sabi, embrace the imperfection. It's flowers on dirty New York City streets. It made his problem better, and it really was able to prolong the beautiful life of these flowers for all New Yorkers to enjoy. It's a reminder, we can't fix everything. The artist Glenn Taylor on the right tries to fix porcelain with rope, doesn't really work, it's not functional. But the artist Patti Freitas from Brazil, she repairs furniture with lacquer and acrylic. It may not be your taste, but it's functional. Think about what has the potential to be fixed, what can be fixed, and be able to articulate what you can't fix and get rid of it. Delegate it to someone else and devote your limited resources to what it is that you can fix. And I want to share with you as the last illustration of art before I wrap this all up and open it up to questions, is the artwork of Christo and Jean-Claude. They were romantic partners and they were artistic partners, and they wrapped things all over the world. In the center, I'm showing you the Pont Neuf in Paris. They wrapped the Reichstag in Berlin. They hung the Valley Curtain. In 2006, in the lower left-hand corner, they installed the saffron-colored gates in Central Park, and they even wrapped a small island off of Italy and created a walkway for people to actually walk to the island. And the last project that Jean-Claude and Christo had worked on together was, the idea was to wrap the Arc de Triomphe in Paris. And so I decided, COVID be damned, I wanted to see Christo's last project in person because the project was delayed twice. First, there was some bird that had established its nests in the Arc de Triomphe, and they couldn't disrupt the environmental situation. And secondly, it was postponed because of the pandemic. And then very sadly, Christo died this past spring, but his studio decided to go forward with the project. And I thought, this is my last opportunity to ever see a Christo project live. So I went to Paris in October, and these are my photographs. So I got to Paris and I stayed very nearby so I could photograph it in many different iterations. And oh, there's the Arc de Triomphe, sorry. So this is what they were going to cover. I put it in the wrong place. This is what I encountered when I got to Paris. And I was able to photograph it. It looked like a woman's dress with a belt. I was able to stand under it and to the side of it. And those of you who follow me on social media followed me to Paris, and I put these pictures up on social media. It was absolutely gorgeous. And I say this with great humility and pride that the French National Police are one of my clients, and they took me to the top of the Arc de Triomphe, and I got to see it through Christo's eyes. I saw it with the red rope and the silvery fabric. And of course, it's always raining in Paris, but these views of Paris through Christo's eyes, or what even posthumously profoundly changed how I see my work and how I see problem solving. And then I got to see the Arc de Triomphe at night, which was also spectacular to see Parisians and visitors from all over the world so joyous about this. And the thing about Christo and Jean-Claude's projects is they're always very short-lived, 2 weeks at most. And so I was in Paris as it started to come down. And it was like undressing the Arc de Triomphe. It was like it was coming out of its costume. And of course, that's when the sun comes out, And so I took these pictures of the Arc de Triomphe coming out of its costume. And my last night in Paris, this is what I saw. And I said, okay, it's time to come home. Now, the reason I share this with you is that it so profoundly changed the way I saw my work and problem solving. If this Bulgarian artist of Christo could come to France, wrap the Arc de Triomphe. You don't mess with the Arc de Triomphe. You don't mess with the Parisians. It's, Napoleon commissioned it. It's like our Lincoln Memorial, don't mess with it. But this Bulgarian artist posthumously was able to wrap the Arc and unwrap it. And it came out, much as we're going to come out after the pandemic, not the same, but better. And all the problems that they had to overcome, the environmental, the administrative, the financial, they overcame all of those hurdles and problems and created something that's better than it was before. And it was a profound trip for me. And I wear this my family got me this little gold Arc de Triomphe that I wear around my neck now as my superpower. So I wanted to share that with you. And I'm going to connect the dots now. Do I really have to draw you a picture? Thank you, Ed Rocher. How do we bring this all together? Number one, I'm showing you the work of Jennifer Odom. It's called Tables Rising. And in 2018, I went to see this, and it's standing sentinel on the banks of the Mississippi River, guarding against post-Katrina floodwaters and rising up against adversity. I love the idea of the table. When people can't agree, what do? They come to the table. When people in the lower wards in New Orleans, when the floods come in, what do they do with their valuables? When the levees break, they put their valuables on the table. And it's a reminder to all of us that we can take affirmative steps to affect positive change, but problems don't solve themselves. We have to make things happen. Don't be afraid to look in another direction from everybody else for a new solution. Sometimes we have to look away. We have to look away from the crowd because what everybody else wants to do is the same old, same old. We have to be the innovators. This is kind of what the world looks like right now. One of my favorite artists, Julie Meritu, it's controlled chaos. It's color, it's different media. It seems so chaotic. And I know that we're striving for symmetry, as in Ellsworth Kelly symmetry, never gonna happen. But you know what? If perfection is not the enemy of good, asymmetry is okay. We can live with asymmetry, and actually it's a beautiful thing to live with. I went to a biennial at the Whitney Museum when I was 11 years old, predating my college years. And I remember saying to my father, I am going to go to the ladies' room all by myself. And so I walked up to this guard and I asked the guard for directions to the ladies' room. Well, the guard, it turns out, is a sculpture by Dwayne Hansen from 1975. The guard did not give me directions to the ladies' room. And it is, you know, just burned into my mind. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to do the wrong thing. Learn from them, laugh at yourself, and move on. Speaking of laughing at yourself, don't lose your sense of humor. I love this photograph of Picasso with the dinner rolls as his fingers. It never ceases to get us all to smile. And in problem solving, the world is such a bleak place right now that we have to keep our sense of humor. And I want to remind all of you that I know we want to leave the pandemic behind us, but we need to look back, to look forward. And I show you the Raft of the Medusa, and I show you Frank Stella's sculpture of the same name from 1991. He had to look back to look forward to create this. He created his own raft. He made a sculpture and a painting together. And it doesn't take an art history degree to see the similarities, but it's a reminder that there's so much richness in the past and so many lessons learned, especially from the last 2 years, that we need to carry forward with us. And my last slide. That is my website. If any of you have questions we don't get to tonight, I'd be happy to answer them. Those are my 2 books and my 3rd book coming out in September. It's where I am on social media. And just another Ed Ruscha reminder, we need to do this now. We're facing a lot of problems. And I hope that this presentation will broaden your vision and give you additional tools to solve so many of the problems that we're facing. So I want to thank you again for spending your time with me this evening. And if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat room. Any questions, any comments, any takeaways? And I'm going to turn it back to Ellen. Okay, here's a question. How are the books different? The question is, how are the 2 books different? In Visual Intelligence, I talk about the work that I did, how using works of art, the analysis of works of art, is helping people across the professional spectrum to enhance their observation, perception, and communication skills. And in Fixed, I focus specifically on problem solving, how we can use the artist process. It's sort of the 2.0, how we can take it one step further and use the artist process to apply it to specifically to problem solving. Can I expand on the assertion that we're going to emerge from the pandemic better than before? I'm glad you love the optimism. I work hard at trying to be half glass full. I say this is not just some platitude that I'm spouting off. I've started to travel again and I work around the country, and I really have this, this visceral feeling. People want things to be better. We're all exhausted, literally and figuratively. We are all exhausted, and we can't help but learn from the past 2 years. So much has gone wrong, but I think you will all agree that so much has gone right. We've learned about ourselves. We've learned about our work. Individually, collectively, professionally, personally, we've learned so much that we have to put that to work, and we need to move forward affirmatively. And the other reason it's going to be better is because we're now equipped for the next thing that's going to hit us down the road. Any other questions? Can you elaborate on what SMART is about? Of course, SMART is the young adult adaptation of visual intelligence. It's for 9 to 13-year-olds, and it's called SMART, Use Your Eyes to Boost Your Brain, published by Simon & Schuster, coming out in September. And the 3 takeaways, they're good for adults too. Using works of art, there are 100 works of art in here. It teaches young adults how to see, how to think about what they see, and how to talk about what they see. I think a lot of adults can use that as well. I'm very excited about this book, and it'll be out in September, but it is for pre-order on Amazon now. Any other questions? Hi, Carrie. Thank you.
Amy, Vicki, Salemi has a question.
Sure. You mentioned earlier in the presentation, you don't usually read the wall card in the museums. How do you usually absorb art? Great question, Vicki. Thank you. What happens is, and I encourage all my participants, is to look at the work of art first, think about what you see, and then read the label. Because one thing that happens when we read labels is what's called confirmation bias. I'm not belittling or relegating labels. I think they're very important. They're not superfluous to our looking at works of art. But if you read a label first, as most people do, because I watch people in museums all the time, they read a label for 10 seconds, they look at the work of art for 3 seconds, and they walk away. You're going to look for what that label tells you to look for. And it's just one curator's interpretation of what that work is about. And I want to encourage people to develop their own sense of observation and perception, because it's in there. It's inherent in all of us. Develop that first. See what your own observations are, and then read the wall label. Sometimes I don't get around to it. I should more than I do, but I like to look first and read second. I think it helps develop our sense of critical inquiry. Thanks for the question, Vicki. Anything else? Comments, questions, takeaways? How would you see the street work of Banksy in regards to how his work is seen through a different lens? It definitely is a different lens. And I think what Banksy's work does in a way that other artworks don't is when they're a combination of visual art and performance art. You know, when at the auction block, when they hit the gavel down and then the work starts to self-shred, it's an act of performance. So I think it crosses the line from visual art to conceptual art to performance art. And we never quite know what Banksy's going to throw out there. So I keep my eye open for it, but you just never know what it's going to show you. Anything else? What about the other senses to gain information or understanding? Art typically doesn't make a sound, nor are we able to touch it. It may have an odor. Yes, I think that I believe, well, from my research, perceptions are informed by observations of the 5 senses. And I encourage people to think about when they're looking at a narrative in a painting, what are the sounds in the painting? What it smell like in the painting? If you were there, when I'd say to my cops, all right, you're in the painting, who are you going to arrest? And they always point to Christ. They say, oh, he's causing the trouble. Or they point to things, because we have to be able to use our 5 senses, not only to make the best decisions, but to solve problems. What is someone's tone of voice? How firm is their handshake? So I use art as the foundation and the leverage to think about incorporating all 5 of our senses into our analysis.
Amy, Leslie Ann Howard had a question. Can you share what you've seen that helps motivate people who are stuck or who won't work together?
Yes, how to motivate people who are stuck or can't work together. What I do is I talk about things that shut down a conversation, and we're all good at saying, well, I don't know, or I don't like that. And what I do is make me the heavy and say, you know what? I can't see how you got there. Can you walk me through how you got there? Because I can't see it. And what happens is you put the onus on someone else, you open up the dialogue. And one of the things, again, at the risk of sounding like a platitude, I like to meet people where they are. By going to where they are, I'm showing them, I'm saying, look, I want to hear what you have to say in the hope that you're going to hear what I have to say. I'm validating that you have a different opinion than I do. But if we're going to solve this problem collaboratively, I need to know where you're coming from, and you need to know where I'm coming from. And in the process, and I learned this from hostage negotiators, it de-escalates a situation while opening up the door for communication. So use the sight thing. Say, I don't see where you're coming from. Please walk me through it. Anything else?
I think we're good.
I think we're good. Just a few minutes after 8. How would I advise a top negotiator such as Chris Voss to see things differently? I was on the Chris Voss show. Lucky me. Chris Voss interviewed me. We had a fantastic time because he came onto the show and said, all right, what am I going to learn from this? I hate art. And I thought, well, that's a great start. And by the end, we ended the show as friends. And he actually said, I think I might use this. So again, by meeting people where they are, I didn't go on to the Chris Voss show saying, all right, we're going to butt heads. We don't have anything in common. he wanted to know what I do. So he gave me an opportunity and he listened. And listening is one of those 5 senses. So lucky me, I got to be on the Chris Voss show. Hi, Ellen. Yes, good advice for teenagers. Absolutely. My poor son has grown up with every single slide. Poor guy lives and breathes the art of perception. I'm glad you could listen. Well, I want to again thank all of you. And if your questions weren't answered, please feel free to reach out to me on my website. And I want to thank you again, Ellen and Rachel and Council of Lafayette Women, for making this opportunity available.
Thank you, Amy. I just want to say that I was remiss in mentioning that you were the keynote speaker at our 2018 CLW conference, which was our last in-person conference. So I want everybody to know that Amy is already has a double header here for CLW, and for that we are most grateful. I wanted to end with a quote in honor of Women's History Month, in honor of women's artists, and in honor of Amy, by Georgia O'Keeffe, who said that I decided that if I could paint that flower in a huge scale, you could not ignore its beauty. And I think that if we have something blown up in front of us, how do we ignore it? And I think our art of perception, maybe Georgia was a precursor for you developing your company, Amy, and I hope she's an inspiration to you.
She absolutely is. A beautiful quote to end with, Ellen. Thank you so much.
And thank you for our audience for joining us this evening. We hope to make this presentation available to everyone in the Lafayette community in the near future. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.